and I'll go ahead and record. For all of those who can't be here, just started the recording.
Well, I wanted to start by just telling you a little bit about our origin story and how we came to be a coalition together. In 2013, I met Anita Amstutz at a Women Doing Theology conference, and we started talking about creation care and climate change and also extractive industry. And I had been working on the Doctrine of Discovery together with folks from the World Council of Churches since 2011. And I was approached by Erica Littlewolf from MCC Central States, who asked if I would be willing to start getting a group of people together around the Doctrine of Discovery. Anita introduced me to Sherry Hostetler, and the three of us together initiated the first coalition meeting, which happened in San Francisco in 2014 at the Mennonite church there, of which Sherry Hostetler is the pastor. And we very quickly built up momentum, made a documentary film, and started really trying to work out together what it means to be a coalition and what we might do together in service to the Spirit of life. That is, following together the Spirit of life, the great animator in this work. And so I want to begin there by talking about what a coalition is and a little bit about what a coalition isn't. What's the difference between an organization and a coalition, or an institution and a coalition? Well, I think one of the most important things to think about is that organizations typically begin by making plans. And often what happens with an organization is one of the most important priorities is to ensure its own survival. So keeping the organization together becomes a primary goal of every organization. And so that's, anyway, I'm a trained sociologist. It's one of the things we know about organizations in general. And so a coalition is different from an organization because a coalition is a diverse number of people coming together and coalescing around a shared goal, set of goals and vision. In the case of this coalition, following the Spirit of life, the energy of the Spirit of life, working together to dismantle oppressive structures, specifically those that are a legacy of colonization, those structures that exist today, what I would call structural violence. So what a coalition does is a coalition provides a space for these diverse folks to come together and to work together in that shared space, to find mutuality and shared support, and for folks to be able to follow their own energy in terms of how they want to accomplish the work together. So our coalition is a volunteer entity following the energy of the Spirit of life. And so we gather and we worship and we discern together where the Spirit is moving. And the coalition seeks to and strives to support people in the work that they're doing in various ways. So anyone who wants to engage and work can start a committee. So those of us who originated the coalition did so in the Anabaptist environment. And so many of you who are Mennonites know that Mennonite people work in committees. So here in this coalition, that is our original structure. Katerina is going to talk more about that as we go on. But anybody who has energy to do a project can do that. Anyone can form a committee. And we are held together by our shared values. And our coalition invests in activists and rather than in solidifying an organization's survival. So I'm going to hand it off to Katerina, who's going to talk about our structure.
Thanks, Sarah. Thumbs up if you can see the screen here. Awesome. I know some of you pictured in this photo are on the call. I saw Sarah Nahar joining and Jonathan Nahar and some others, I think, in this picture. This was from a gathering back in, I think, maybe 2017, we gather annually and come together with our different committees, passion, gifts, energy, and seek the way forward together towards this collective purpose, which is to call on the church to address the extinction, extraction, and enslavement done in the name of Christ on Indigenous lands. And this is really at the heart of how we started, which was desiring, as Sarah said back in 2014, to call our own church structures as the Mennonite Church to follow the lead of Indigenous peoples who are defending lands and waters today at risk of death, at risk of great harm, not only to them, but to the entire planet because of the ongoing impacts of the doctrine of discovery, which Sarah is going to define more formally in a little bit. But first, I just wanted to share a little bit with you all about how our structure is organized, how our coalition is organized. And this is a chart that we created last year to just visualize the different committees and how we relate together as a coalition. So we have three main standing committees that have continued since we first began and evolved over time. One is the Cultural Change Committee, and that is one that I've been a part of for the last 7 years or more, seeking to create educational resources for the church, as well as prayers, laments, litanies, ways to engage the doctrine of discovery in our church worship, seeking to affect people's hearts and minds towards action and towards addressing the systemic roots of the doctrine of discovery. And then we have, I'll skip to our right-hand side, parallel to that work is our Structural Change Committee, which is addressing the laws and policies that continue to oppress Indigenous peoples and seeking to both accompany Indigenous partners today who are struggling for justice and seeking to address the harms of the doctrine of discovery. Sarah will share a little bit about two Indigenous partners we're working with right now around Oak Flat and a Maya community in the Yucatan that committee is especially working around. And that committee also seeks to do our own work as settlers and as Christians to address the structures that benefit us and perpetuate the doctrine of discovery in our legal system. And then the third committee is the Constituency Engagement Committee, which this year we just decided to shift the name to Story Sharing Committee and to become more about sharing out the stories from our coalition and from Indigenous partners, then specifically engaging constituents around fundraising and other ways. And we have different ad hoc committees that form as well. One of those right now is an administrative committee and a fundraising committee, and a new one that grew out of a book study of Sarah's book, The Land Is Not Empty, called Follow the Money, based on chapter 7 of that book, to address the extractive industries and our own profits from those industries for people who have investments in resources being gained from Indigenous lands and taken from there. And each of those committees, the three standing committees at least, sends a representative to form our steering committee. And so each committee has representation and can share updates and reports. And then there's also a chair and co-chair of our steering committee each year. And some of this structure, I should say, is really up to the needs and evolving movement of our coalition each year. So you all get to be a part of it as you join the coalition. And that means that if you want to form a committee, like, for example, we formed one around Standing Rock when the pipeline struggle was happening and delegated people to go and represent us there on the ground at Standing Rock. You can decide, hey, I'm forming a Standing Rock committee, and we empower you and say, run with it. Some of those committees last a year or two because it's around a particular struggle or issue. And then they fold back in and are composted into other forms. And so it's really, like Sarah said, a movement versus an organization which relies on your volunteer energy and commitment. Our latest part of this structure is called the Repair Network of Congregations and Communities. And this is a new way for entire church communities or church camps or other Mennonite communities to join our coalition and to work together both locally and internationally towards the work of repair in response to the doctrine of discovery. So if you're interested in learning more, some of you are already part of the Repair Network, reach out to me. I'm the Repair Network organizer, and I'll share a little bit more about that later in our presentation and can share offline too. I just wanted to share our working model for change that we've been working with over the last 2 years as a coalition, of really recognizing the ways that both cultural change and structural change are needed for long-term systemic change, the ways that we need both the changing of hearts and minds, of renewed ways of being and seeing, of a sense of interconnection with all life to form kind of a renewed consciousness, or what some of us in the Christian church see as a Christ consciousness forming, so that we see ourselves as not separate from the rest of life on this planet, and from what Indigenous peoples are calling those of us who aren't Indigenous to wake up to, the potential for the potential for healing, as well as a potential for great harm, and what's happened under the doctrine of discovery. And then we also see that as going hand in hand with structural change, which is the change in laws and policies, the kind of systemic shifts that need to happen, redistributing power from white Western colonial ways of structuring power in governance and society to Indigenous-led initiatives, returning land as part of that work of structural reform and repair, recognizing UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as a framework that's been upheld and created by Indigenous peoples for structural change to happen. Other examples include financial institutions being held to account. So we see the both and of these working together and seek to address both in our work in committees, cultural change committee and structural change committees, working together towards long-term change and following the leadership of Indigenous partners. So Sarah, do you want to add anything to that change model before we go forward?
Nope, that sounds great. Thanks, Katerina. And I wonder if we could just go off the slides for a minute. Thank you. And so, I see that I'm spotlighted there, and I'm going to go back to the small me. And I want to just ask the group if I could see everyone. So I wonder if you could go off spotlight too, Katerina. I'm not sure how to do that for you.
Yeah, I'll be on mute, but I don't think I'm on spotlight. Do you also?
Oh, okay. Sorry, it's probably my view. Thanks everybody for your patience as I express my limitation as a non-digital native. Okay. So I just want to ask the group, what is the doctrine of discovery? I wonder if you'd be willing to put in the chat. What is it from your point of view? Just get a sense of what you think here. And then we're going to go over some details. What do you think? What is it? What is this doctrine we're talking about? Okay, so Annie in the chat says it's an imperialistic document from hundreds of years ago. And then let's see, it's coming kind of fast for me. Luke says a series of documents that became Catholic Church doctrine, which enshrined terra nullius and the idea of slavery. Yeah, so terra nullius is this understanding that if a land wasn't ruled by a Christian monarch, that it was empty of humans. So Craig says religious and political justification for European colonizers starting in the 1400s and expanding all the dang time. So Craig is really pointing out that it's a justification, or what I would call an ideological alibi, like that. So Joel says the fallacy that an individual, state, or people group can take what they find. So Joel is calling it a fallacy. And Rich and Brenda say it's a worldview. They call it a worldview of North Atlantic Christian privilege. I like that too, called a worldview. Charles says the reason so many of my people live in poverty, broken homes, and reject Jesus. Yeah, so it is absolutely a primary cause of much suffering among Indigenous peoples. And I would also add to that people from the dominant culture, because these structures cause us to be alienated from each other. George and Karen say the doctrine that if you, Europeans, discover land, it is okay to take it, especially if people are not Christian, is very much part of what Terra Nullius is all about. So Busy says the set of papal bulls that set forth the structures and policies that would allow for the dehumanization of Indigenous peoples as well as transatlantic slavery. So true that the doctrine, those papal bulls that make up the doctrine also formed the basis or justification for slavery. But anyway, Busy names documents, but also talks about structural policies. And Raylene says a system of laws, policies, codes, edicts, expectations to privilege the Christian church. I like that, Raylene. You're singing my song. I often talk about the doctrine as being a system. And Hallie says it's justification for systemic sin. I love that because, you know, from my point of view, I'm going to go to the pulpit for a minute here. What the prophets are talking about very much when they're talking about sin is collective sin or systemic sin, corruption in the courts, hardness of hearts in terms of inequality between the rich and poor. And so the doctrine of discovery is very much a justification for that kind of sin, especially in this culture, in our individualist society. So anyway, I'm going to stop there. And then thanks, everybody. I love the fact that you're contributing. Much of what you're saying is helpful to me, and I hope it's helpful to each other. And Katerina, if you'd show the slide, and I'll tell you, you know, kind of my typical blurb of what I say the doctrine is. Let's see, I can't see. Oh, there it is. Okay. So the doctrine of discovery is a legal and a philosophical framework dating to the 15th century that gave Christian governments moral and legal rights to invade and seize Indigenous lands and dominate Indigenous people. So I'll let you read the slide. I don't need to read it to you. But what I want to say here is that it's a system of laws and policies. In the United States specifically, it is a legal doctrine. Anyone want to take a stab at what a legal doctrine is? Well, I won't put pressure on you this time. You know, legal doctrine is more than one law or policy. A doctrine is a framework for interpreting the law. And the doctrine of discovery in the United States, as titled by our Supreme Court, is a doctrine for how we interpret law as it relates to land use in the United States and as it pertains to Indigenous peoples. So I want to be really clear, this is not a number of old documents, old dusty documents. It is a current legal structure. It's the lens through which our highest court, the Supreme Court, interprets the law as it pertains to the lands of Indigenous peoples. So anyone want to guess, when was the last time the Supreme Court made a determination that is a majority decision, a ruling based on the doctrine of discovery, where the doctrine of discovery was the basis of the decision they made? Anyone want to guess? Last week. Oh, well, I love that you say last week. I would totally agree with that. And the Oklahoma ruling, I could go on about that, but I won't at this moment. But I will say, I read the dissenting opinion. I haven't read the majority opinion yet of the Oklahoma case. However, I do know that prior to that case, which I haven't read thoroughly, it was in 2005, and the person who penned the majority decision was Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So the reason I bring that up and talk about Ruth Bader Ginsburg is to tell you that this is a matter of settled law, whether judges are progressive or conservative. It's not a question. The doctrine of discovery is an assumed reality in the United States. It is the basis of land tenure for decisions that relate to Indigenous people. So it is an institution in the same way that slavery was an institution historically in the United States. Okay, I will stop there. All right, so next, I want to talk about some campaigns. And the campaigns are really to illustrate who we work with. Who do we work with in the coalition? You know, one of the ways we sort that out is we say we want to work with Indigenous peoples that seek to dismantle the doctrine of discovery. And those people are experts in their own environment. And we follow their leadership as we accompany them in campaigns. And one example of that campaign, if you could go back, Katerina, is at Oak Flat. So many of you may be aware of Oak Flat in Arizona, that there was a land trade that took place where land sacred to the Apache stronghold, but also to the San Carlos Apache, was traded away so that a copper mine could form the largest copper mine in the history of the United States. And so the stronghold Apache have been working to protect Oak Flat many long years, and they are a partner, and we accompany them in that struggle. So that is to say, there are people on the coalition who live in Arizona who work on that, and also people from across the nation who work in collaboration with that committee that is in support of Oak Flat. Then the next slide is about our partners among the Maya people. This is with Cacushtal, which is a group in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico who are fighting the land grabbing of their traditional homeland. Their land is being invaded for the purpose of large-scale agriculture, and their lifeway is interrupted. Their ability to seek a livelihood has been interrupted through not only poisoning of the aquifer, through putting toxic chemicals into the environment, but also through pushing Maya people out of their homeland, and also economic development projects, especially the Maya Train, which is a tourist operation that is designed to bring tourists into Mayan environments without their collaboration or consent, and where the national government is taking away land from the Maya people to do that. So these are two campaigns that we're working with, where we follow the leadership of Indigenous partners and provide accompaniment and collaboration together with them. All right, and so who do we work with? I also want to just point out that not all Indigenous communities are monolithic, and I'm going to go into that a little bit more in a few minutes. But now Katerina is going to talk about the repair network.
So like I mentioned earlier, as we were talking about our coalition structure, we launched a repair network last year of Mennonite congregations and communities invited to join our efforts in our campaigns. So we invite them quarterly to join Zoom calls, as well as to join monthly prayer and action hours that are open to anyone actually in the broader public, but especially responding to the invitation of Indigenous partners like the Apache Stronghold to see prayer as part of our work, as integrated with action. So we take time to pray following requests from Indigenous partners. And part of that prayer grows into advocacy efforts. So we've gotten on the phone with congressional representatives during that prayer hour each month, advocating for them to stop the land transfer of Oak Flat to the copper mining company, for example. And these congregations are also invited to take steps within their own bioregions and their own local areas to learn the treaty history, to learn of the history of Indigenous removal or of the ongoing presence of Indigenous peoples in the area, and to seek reparative justice with them, as well as responding to our national and international Indigenous partner campaigns. So we have 7 steps listed on our website that we invite repair congregations and communities to take together and to support each other in, to share ideas and stories. We're going to be sharing some stories later at our annual meeting coming up later this month of what repair congregations are up to. Some of them are involved in Dakota land recovery. I know for those of you in Minnesota who might be part of that project or those efforts, they've partnered with Makoche Iki Chupe, an Indigenous partner organization we've worked with in the past, to be part of restoring traditional Dakota lodges and buildings on Dakota homelands, restoring some of the land base through fundraising efforts to buy back land with Dakota communities. So just one example of some of the work that folks are up to, both locally as well as supporting the campaigns we work on. And like I said earlier, if you'd like to join the Repair Network or encourage your community to join, we're looking for ambassadors on the ground and would love to talk with you about being a coalition ambassador and inviting folks to join the Repair Network. And we're hoping to expand beyond MCUSA. Right now, we're Mennonite Church USA focused, but have talked about what does this mean across the border with Canada, for example, or we've had folks reach out to us from United Church of Christ or other denominational backgrounds interested in joining, and that's an ongoing conversation. We have a 2-tiered approach, which Sarah has mentioned, towards our work of partnership with Indigenous peoples. And like Sarah said, we see Indigenous leaders as experts in their own environment, that they are the ones who identify their goals, their priorities, their outcomes in line with decolonization work. And we're invited, not as helpers or folks dropping in with a white savior complex to fix things, but we're there to listen, to learn, and to support in whatever way we can as co-conspirators. And as folks invited into relationship with, we make mistakes along the way, and that's part of the journey of learning from those. For those of us who are white, recognizing that's not everyone in the room, there's often this concept that of white supremacy, of perfectionism as part of that concept. And so we got to get over ourselves and learn how to make mistakes in an appropriate way to learn and move forward in the struggle for life and in the ongoing journey of dismantling together. We also take responsibility as Christians, acknowledging that the doctrine of discovery emerged from the Christian church, as some of you shared in the 15th century and 16th century, recognizing the ways that that's all of our shared story and history as those of us who claim to follow Jesus, even if we're embarrassed by it today, recognizing that that's something that we claim and seek to take responsibility for the ways that our society has been built on those corrupt foundations. And so there are some areas of the work that are ours to do. That might be addressing a policy or a law that's been set up by the US government or by other structures that continues to benefit settlers or settler descendants, and to oppress Indigenous communities. And so for some of our work, we identify what are those areas that are ours to do and that we don't expect Indigenous peoples, though we follow their leadership in struggles on the ground, we don't expect them to do all of the work. And so that's nuanced work that we're leaning into as a coalition. and recognize that we can organize ourselves to follow Indigenous leadership while also taking responsibility around the work of dismantling. So I'll turn it back over to Sarah to share more.
Okay, and so I'm going to share some of our vision here with you as a coalition. I chose not to have our whole vision here because it's rather lengthy, but I want to share some highlights with you. We acknowledge that Indigenous peoples form complex and diverse communities with varied interests. And so I have heard as a woman of color from multiple times from many people, I'm not sure in any given struggle who to side with because there is division among Indigenous peoples. So because Indigenous peoples are divided, I don't feel like I can take a stand. To which, I will reply a little bit tongue in cheek, well, I feel the same way about gun control. When all the white people agree on what to do about gun control, then I'll be willing to take a stand. That's just not the way it works. Native peoples are not monolithic. They are a diverse group of people, many nations in the United States of people who have varied interests. And so how do we know as a coalition where we are going to stand, understanding that not all Indigenous people agree, not all Indigenous peoples agree, because there's more than one, right? There are many nations. And so we choose to join with and support the brilliance of Indigenous individuals and communities that are seeking self-determination, decolonization, and the dismantling of oppressive systems and structures, including the doctrine of discovery. And so that's our position. It is a complex society that we live in. We know that when, for example, I'll just give you another example. If I have opinions that differ from the state of Washington, where I live, from the legislature of the state of Washington, and we have a conversation about it and you agree with me, you're not further deepening the wedge between me and the state, right? So Native American tribes are just like that. They have a tribal structure. It's an authority structure that's like a state. They have under their treaties, those treaty tribes have standing similar to a state, and they have a state structure. And while that tribal structure makes decisions for the collective, not every citizen of that tribe agrees with that tribal government, and that's okay. And that is a pluralistic society. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge that Native communities are just like communities in the dominant culture. So we have multiple political parties in the dominant culture, and there are multiple views as well within any Native community or discourse. Next slide, please, Katerina. Okay, and then we are working now to engage in a 100-year vision to dismantle the doctrine of discovery and to seek climate justice. And so this is what I mean by that. We recognize that the structures that we live with now, the laws and policies that define reality for all of us now in this nation, are not going to be dismantled in 60 months. We're not going to see complete success for dismantling the doctrine of discovery in a few years. I assume it will not be in my lifetime. So my commitment and my responsibility is to engage in the work I can engage in now to create a platform for the people who will come after me. And I want to acknowledge that this is multi-generational work. I'm not going to achieve it in my lifetime, and that's okay. There is a social theorist named Doug McAdam, and he talks about, hey, activists are organized for openings in the political opportunity structure. What that means is from time to time, there's an opportunity for people who are organized to really make change in that moment. For example, several years ago, I would say in 2018, we were working together with the Mosquito people of Nicaragua, and then there was a bill that came across the United States Congress about responding to military spending in Nicaragua, we were able to insert human rights language into that bill because we were organized, because we had relationships with people, the Mosquito people on the ground, because we had a national coalition of people who were able to mobilize and go see their senators and really work together to collaborate to make sure that this language was inserted into the law. That law then creates the precedent of human rights language in US foreign policy as it pertains to Indigenous peoples. So that was an opportunity. We didn't make that happen. It was happening. And so we were there to respond to it. So that's part of what we're doing together in this coalition, is preparing ourselves to respond. And we know that it's important that we're prepared. It's important that we know and understand to the extent that we can what's happening, and that we're well organized. And we are not primary players right now, which means that we are in the mode of creatively and with a lot of different diversity, trying a variety of different things in the world, seeking change, specifically structural and cultural change. So to that end, we're working on visioning together with Indigenous leaders campaigns that will be lengthy, such as seeking a constitutional amendment that would include the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in the US Constitution. We know a constitutional amendment is not going to happen quickly, but it's worth doing. If we were successful in doing that, we would be able to roll back precedent. That is to say, legal decisions that are based in the doctrine of discovery, because that policy would replace the doctrine of discovery. So for example, that's a long-term potential campaign. Another is to seek redress from international financial institutions that are working on economic development. Specifically, there is a small group of us working on trying to penetrate the G7 and the G20 and really have influence over how economic policy is created at that level, as we seek to advocate for the rights of Indigenous peoples, and with Indigenous peoples, understanding that if Indigenous peoples and their lands are not safe, that we are not safe, and that no one is safe until all of us are safe. So we're not helpers, we're not service providers, we are siblings and co-conspirators working together for justice and for the survival of people, creation, and all life. All right, so I think we are going to move on now to talk about how you can join the coalition if you're interested in doing that. And then we're going to have a large period of time for you to ask questions and for us to talk with each other.
Thanks, Sarah. And yeah, so this is kind of our broad summary overview, and there's a lot more that we could talk about or go into depth, and we can do that also one-on-one, depending on your availability and interest to volunteer with us. One of the ways to join the coalition is to join one of our committees. Each of the committees that I've talked to recently has said, yeah, we're open to new volunteers. We would love more support. Oak Flat isn't just based in Arizona. Carol Rose, the person heading that up, a pastor at Shalom Mennonite Fellowship, has shared that they're looking for people across the country in the US to advocate for the Save Oak Flat Act, which is a key piece of legislation coming out this year and being reintroduced again by Representative Grijalva. So they're advocating and organizing around Oak Flat. I know the Cultural Change Committee has been taking a year of reflection to discern what is our next resource. And they've been working on a board game together to creatively address, through play and through having fun, to creatively address the structures behind the doctrine of discovery, and to come up with, could there be a board game that imagines 7 generations of time and uses both competitive, more domination kind of tactics over land and peoples versus collaborative, restorative tactics? And what does it look like to win? What does success mean over 7 generations if we sort of play out the doctrine of discovery in a board game. So I know they're working on that and those concepts, talking about a youth curriculum as well. You're welcome to join one of those committees, as well as the story sharing committee that's just reforming. Marisa Smucker, who's with Mennonite Mission Network, is our new chair for that committee. And she's excited to invite writers to share stories, bloggers, social media activists, people who can post videos, especially, you know, young folks who may be, not saying that those of us 30s and up are not adept online, but young folks have like TikTok and things that I don't even know about as a 30-something. So looking for whatever your gift is, whatever your passion is, we will probably find a way to use it. Join a committee and we'll figure out how to plug you in. Or be a sort of floating volunteer that's kind of like the connective tissue of our organization, of our coalition and movement. Some ideas that Sarah and I brainstormed before this orientation, that some needs that we saw were admin volunteers, people who can send out doodle polls. This is like kind of like doing the civil rights movement where they talked about they need people to, you know, make the photocopies and wash the dishes. This is like the kind of grunt labor equivalents that don't always get noticed, but that are really essential. Taking notes during committee meetings, or even posting on our website updates and blogs. Maintaining the website. We're looking for a volunteer librarian to catalog resources that we've compiled related to the doctrine of discovery and share those out, or offer tech support in Zoom meetings like this, helping with Spanish interpretation. If you have experience and your Spanish is at a level to be bilingual, we're looking for Spanish interpreters to offer our volunteers a break with the Maya Solidarity Subcommittee, working with folks in the Yucatan Peninsula. Sarah had this great idea. What about coordinating a game night where we don't talk about the coalition and business at all, but we just get together and have fun and, you know, connect through Zoom or do social activities regionally apart from the coalition work, as a way of showing like this, we are seeking to be an extension of the body of Christ together and to be church together, to be movement. If you're not a Christian, that's okay too, to come and join and feel like you're part of a community that is strengthened by our relationships and friendships together. Being a Repair Network ambassador, inviting new congregations and communities to join the Repair Network, accompanying them in their journeys towards solidarity with Indigenous peoples. I can't tell you how many requests I get to review a land acknowledgement statement, for example. And I'll share that out with volunteers who I know have done a lot of work around that and ask them for feedback. But if you feel like, you know, I've been doing this work for a while, I might have some things to share or offer in conversation with us. We'd love to consider you an ambassador for the coalition and have you plug in if that feels like a good fit both ways. And then finally, help with our fundraising and donor relations, doing phone calls, thanking people for their donations, hosting a house party. There are lots of different ways to help out in that area. And what I really want to say finally is just, we want to know, what are your passions? What are your gifts? Like I said, it might be related to one of these things, but if it's something else, you know, we'll have some time to talk about that in our Q&A time, comment time, and then just reaching out one-on-one and figuring out how could this be a fit? Maybe you're an artist, maybe you're a singer-songwriter, would love to incorporate more of the arts into this movement, whatever that might be. Finally, if you haven't explored our resources yet, here are just a few examples of further ways to learn about the doctrine of discovery, to educate your own community and to move towards action together, like our documentary film, The Land is Not Empty, the book that Sarah wrote, study guide and Bible reflections that accompany the film on our website. Ted and Company has produced a play that Allison Brookins wrote that I think might be starting a tour again. We have some lament resources the MCUSA, Mennonite Church USA, invited us to create, as well as a recent Stories of Repair resource on our website. And you can always invite a speaker to come and share during your church Zoom hour, education hour, or in worship. Check out our speakers bureau or at other conferences or workshops too. And Sarah, now being full-time, is doing a lot more speaking now that she's more available. And so it's been awesome to see her pop up on Zoom at churches around the country over the last couple weeks and ongoing. Check out our website. Here are some photos of the ways that churches have gotten involved, sharing about supporting the Indian Child Welfare Act. We had a big campaign around that a few years ago. This is San Francisco Mennonite Church providing snacks, food, and lodging for the Oak Flat caravan as they came into San Francisco for a court hearing. Sherry, Anita, and Sarah visiting, I think that was about the NICA Act, Sarah, when you were promoting the NICA Act legislation in partnership with Mosquito people. So many different ways to engage as an individual or church community. And we'd love to see your photo up here and your input into the coalition and engagement. So I'm going to stop there and turn it back over to you, Sarah, if you have anything to add before opening it up to the group.
I don't. You're probably tired of listening to me talk. I'm ready to hear what you have to say. What questions and comments do you have? And I think at this time you could just simply raise your hand and we'll call on you. You don't have to put it in the chat. Let's talk to each other.
And if you don't have questions for us, we can come up with some questions for you, but I bet some folks have comments or questions. I see Annie is raising her hand.
I just had this thought that is coming from my 90-year-old auntie, who is the last remaining relative in my generation ahead of me. And she, for decades, has been our family's prayer warrior. And I wondered if that's a concept that your coalition might be able to promote, that you could invite people to sign up as prayer warriors.
Thank you.
Doing a membership drive to get prayer warriors or something.
I sure appreciate that. Thank you, Annie. And I want to respond first by saying that a big part of the Oak Flat campaign has been really centered around prayer. And Annie, it sounds like if that's what you have passion for, I can't wait for you to start a committee. That's how it works here. Whoever has the big idea, we help you get your committee going and reach out to others to get involved, to really be part of that vision. We pull you into the coalition and we all try to then embrace and work on that, work together.
So who would be the contact person that could like be a facilitating guide if I can actually get this concept kind of motivated a little bit? Who would I contact to get some assistance with that or advice?
Sure enough, I think the best person to reach out to would be Katerina or myself, but I would favor Katerina because she's our organizer and also because she's a pastor. And so, and what would happen then is we would invite other people. If you want to host a committee, we would invite other people to join that committee. You could share it and so on. So the work itself would be the work of the committee, and you could take as long as you want to do that. We would recruit people to be on that, who share that vision. You could recruit people too, and then we'd do our best to give you the resources to do that work. And sometimes that's manpower, sometimes that's advice, sometimes that's, it's a variety of different things. But the committee will then own that vision and work.
And Annie, just to echo, I would love to see that kind of prayer warrior committee get going. That, so much of this struggle, there's no separation in my mind between the spiritual and the political. We both are part of the movement together, and these are powers and principalities that we're up against, and we need that prayer grounding us. There are 2 women who are homebound right now who've reached out through Facebook asking, I don't know how else to get involved because I'm physically unable to be on Zoom meetings or to actually be doing a lot of the work on the ground, but can we pray for you? And so periodically I will send them requests. So I already have 2 people in mind to nominate for a committee if you start that, Annie.
Okay, well, thank you. That it kind of fits in with where I'm at.
Terrific.
Thank
I
you.
see George and Karen's hand.
Yes, I just had a question, and you know, as churches think about and plan for and do reparative work, particularly related to land, I was just wondering how much can the government intercept or interfere with that process?
Yeah, so George, that question is very technical in nature. And I will give you a summary here, and I'd love to have a longer conversation offline. It's interesting that you asked that. I think I see Sarah there in the background, so I'm waving at Sarah. So this is an issue that I'm very interested in. I've been working on land repatriation in my own context, where I live on the reservation for 15 years. And so all of the laws are set up to take land out of tribal membership, and it can be a very arduous process to return land back into the collective. And at times there aren't even policies set up to do that, but it is not impossible. It is possible to do. It takes determination and also collaboration with the Native American tribe. So, and I will also say, I'm just going to say one other quick thing about this, which is to say some tribes are willing to buy deed land and not return it to trust land, right? So it doesn't go back into trust. As I'm sure you know, the federal government, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, holds land in trust for Native American tribes. There are tribes such as Winona Leduc's tribe, who are willing to just buy trust land. They recognize they can't put it back in trust, but they still want to hold it. So they come with another legal mechanism to have it as a homeland. So just because there is the interference of the federal government doesn't mean that it's impossible to return land to Native peoples. There are creative ways to do that. And I could go into detail, but I won't, because it's very tedious. But I would love, George, I crave the time we see each other face to face so we can have a conversation about that that's lengthy. Or I could send you my my short 60-page treatise on land. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, I'd love to talk about it. Thanks for the question.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I see that Luke Henkel had his hand raised.
Oh, sorry, yeah, and I just realized I was off mute somehow. I wanted to say thank you both for facilitating and bringing us all together. This is already so enriching and inspiring. I was hoping, Sarah, if you could just touch again, or pardon if I missed it at the beginning, when you were talking about the concrete campaigns in the slides for the 100-year vision. If you could touch more about that.
Sure, thank you, Luke. Yes, we're still in formation. So the longer story is that I'm working with Native leaders to determine what we can do. What will we do together? So we have examples about what can be done. I am very anxious to in the United States to work on a constitutional amendment that would incorporate, it would be a constitutional amendment that would bring into the US Constitution the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. That would completely change the whole legal structure in the United States. And that's not going to happen overnight. It would be as big a legal shift as the end to the institution of slavery. And it would take, if we got that done in 100 years, it would take another 100 years to, if the United States still exists at that time, it would take another 100 years to do all of the work in the courts to challenge the laws that are in place now. But a worthy thing to consider. Another thing that I am particularly passionate about, so I'm talking to you from my point of view, none of this is decided yet. Something I've been working on since 2005 is thinking about economic development internationally and petitioning international structures. I've worked with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, the United Nations, and a variety of others, including the UN Special to ground economic development for the bottom 20%, those vulnerable people who don't benefit from the UN development goals. So, you know, that's a lot of words. It doesn't have such a quick phrase, but I will just say petitioning the G7 and the G20. That's something I care very much about. So that's an international structure to petition. So those are a few ideas. There are many more. And of course, we're still in the process of determining what those might be. Is that helpful, Luke?
Oh, yes, hugely. Yeah, thank you. And yeah, I understand about it being a very long-term process.
So I want to acknowledge, not only is it the case that we probably won't accomplish it in our lifetime, but it's also the case that we're not starting the work. You know, we are furthering the work of the people that came before us, for the many generations of people who have brought us to the place we are now. As a descendant of the Tiwa people, I say, you know, survival itself is a form of resistance. And I acknowledge my ancestors and the people that came before me that have enabled me to be in the place that I am now, in the social location I am now, to carry on this work. And so it is multi-generational. We're not starting it, and we probably won't finish it. We are in the middle, using our life energy now to follow the movement of the spirit of life, for all life. George, it looks like you have another comment or question.
I lowered my hand, but I did want to say, sort of somewhat humorous. You know, what hurt my heart the most in the last year or two that I have been associated with learning about the doctrine of discovery and dismantling is how much the church was involved. And I've, somewhat on the lighter side, I've said to people, it is really good that Jesus has risen. Otherwise, he'd be turning over in his grave, for sure.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I'm working on a sermon about that, actually. On Father's Day a few weeks ago, I don't know, I think it was just a few weeks ago, I attended a service here on the reservation where I live, at a missionary church. And this missionary church brings young people. They do this incredible work of connecting with families and bringing people in on buses. And they had all these kids there. The majority of the congregation is people, youth and children. And the sermon really focused on the Sermon on the Mount, specifically the Beatitudes. And it was talking about how the Beatitudes, you can only claim those blessings if you acknowledge how sinful you are. So it was really focused on, you know, the suffering you're engaged with now is your fault. It's because of your fallen and sinful nature. And the only way you can receive the benefit of the kingdom of God is if you repent of that sin. And I thought that was a very especially challenging message on Father's Day, when so many of the people in the community where I live find that to be a difficult day, or even a day of mourning, because of the challenges they've had in their family related to historical trauma. And so that message is still so pronounced, that the kingdom of God is for the powerful and the beautiful and the people in the in crowd, and not for the poor and the dispossessed. And we have to move that narrative. Absolutely. Yeah, I have a lot of passion for that. So, so it's so good to be together with people who are willing to challenge that in word and in deed.
Amen. Amen.
Sarah and I have talked about how the cultural change and structural change, as we hold that wheel together, are both needed, like I mentioned. And in this regard, we've talked about, we still have so much theological biblical work to do as church communities towards undoing the kind of mentality of conquest or of superiority or, white supremacy, all of these things that are interlocked and interwoven within our theological assumptions that many of us grew up with and that are still part of mission today in so many places. So I feel like that work goes hand in hand, and we invite people to also be a part of that, especially related with our Cultural Change Committee, but it's in connection with all of the work.
So true, Katerina. And another thing that you and I have talked about is even, in your own community, there's so many ways to engage with this in your own community, looking at your 4th grade curriculum within your school district. In my state, it's 4th grade when we talk about Native American history. Not every state has that we do in Washington. What is being taught, in that 4th grade curriculum? Has that, does that have a liberation focus? At my son's school several years ago, when he was in 4th grade, they were reading Rush Limbaugh's book for Native American curriculum, which is Rush, Revere, and the Brave Pilgrims. So just to say, there are so many ways to be involved in culture change. Absolutely, right where you are, and doesn't require technical expertise. And what expertise you would like, we can help you to gain. We can learn together to figure it out.
I see, Raylene, you have your hand raised. Oh, I think Raylene's on mute, and then we'll go to Donald.
I am very interested in the repair network. My church has recently talked a lot about moving beyond the land acknowledgement that we've used into, well, we don't want to just use the land acknowledgement as a box we check. We would like to become more actively involved in dismantling and decolonization work. And so I am to be a liaison, and we're putting together a group. Do we study and look at how we could become a repair congregation, or how does that process happen?
I'm so glad you asked. I feel like if you didn't ask, I feel like this is a great, I'll pay you later, Raylene.
Okay. Honestly, I'm not a plant.
She's not, I promise people. But I love that question, because I just had a conversation today and yesterday with 2 new interested repair network congregations. And what we do, Raylene, is people reach out through, there's an interest form on our website, or you can just say you're interested, like on this call, and we set up a time to talk with you and representatives from the church community, ideally church leadership, like a pastor, as well as if you have like a social justice committee or a church council or some committee that's kind of charged with decision-making around these things. I have a presentation that I share about what are the steps of commitment as part of the repair network? How are we grounded in the call towards Jubilee? What is our vision of partnership, like we've shared on this call, with Indigenous peoples? And I can share more on an hour-long Zoom call where I share for about 15 minutes, and then we open it up for just questions and discussion. I love to hear how churches are already engaged or what they're already learning, and how we can walk with you on the journey and meet you where you're at. Since not everybody is, in the place of not all congregations are the same. Some haven't even heard of a land acknowledgement. Others are ready to move beyond a land acknowledgement. So let's have a conversation and feel
I would love that. And I have our pastor would be ready to go. Our church moderator is, so this is very helpful, and I'll contact you.
Awesome. Thanks, Raylene. And I'll say too, that if you all are connected with other communities beyond a congregation, for example, Camp Friedenswald joined our repair network last year. That was the first Mennonite camp that joined. We've also talked with colleges and universities about joining. There's a a land acknowledgement team, as they call themselves, at Eastern Mennonite University, who kind of want to embody their land acknowledgement and to seek deeper solidarity with local groups. So it's not just churches, we also want to broaden that framework too. I saw, Sarah, did you want to share anything before we transition to Donald, who had his hand raised?
No, thank you, Katerina. And then I see Charles after that.
Okay. And Luke, on the response to your chat, you asked if it needs to be a religious congregation or if it could be a nonprofit or other justice org. Right now, we're focused just on Mennonite church communities, but my hope and vision in conversation with Sarah in the coming year is that we can expand more beyond Mennonite church communities or camps or colleges to include things like nonprofits or other justice-related orgs or ecumenical groups. As a coalition, we are focused on the Christian church because of that sense of responsibility around the structures of the doctrine of discovery and what they emerged from. But that's not to say that other groups can't join or get involved. So.
Yeah, and I'll just extend what you're saying, Katerina, to say, I believe we're going to talk about it at our annual gathering, because I think a lot of voices are saying we need to, to move out from that, from that smaller vision. And I would expect, Luke, that we will be announcing pretty shortly a different orientation. That's not up to me alone, but I know we'll talk about it at our annual meeting.
Donald, go ahead. I saw that your hand was raised.
Okay, I don't know. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
I guess I'm really sort of at the edge of all of this because I've been involved for 60 years now with indigenous people of the Central Plateau of Vietnam who have been literally destroyed in the last 50 years. During my lifetime, I have dear friends. All of their lands have been taken away from them, and they are being subjected to forcible assimilation. And it's a very, very sad story. I don't know if you all want to deal with that. I mean, this is outside of there is no doctrine of discovery in Vietnam. And no, it is not part of French imperialism. There simply is no doctrine of discovery. It's a strictly Asian issue. In fact, for these people, the only time they were treated with even a modicum of decency was during the French colonial regime. So it's very, very complicated, very, very sad. And, I have many friends from these Montagnard people who are desperately to try to get anybody in the United States who will pay at least some attention to them. So that's my little piece.
Thank you. And it's good to see you, Donald. I know we've corresponded before. I myself am in relationship with multiple tribes in the watershed, or I should say the drainage of the Amazon. And so who face exactly the same thing. And I would say, that's because of international economic development structures. I don't understand the case in the region you're talking about, of course, because I haven't been there, but I've worked with Native people across the world who are all facing the same eradication because of these systems that are set up to benefit the original colonial beneficiaries of the process of colonization. So, there is a lot of work that I do personally with that group. I continue to work with that group, and here, of course, in my own community where I live on the Yakima Indian Reservation. And so, there are many Native people, and I think the first step in setting up a campaign to advocate for a group is to start a committee. And so, that's really the way we work within this coalition, because we're not an organization. So we don't have a body who says, hey, who are we going to work with? The people who are in the coalition determine what the work is. And so if this, one thing to do is to say, I want to start a committee, and we can reach out to all the people in the coalition and say, who wants to accompany this community in this work? and then try and support that work to the extent it's possible. The idea that our coalition will somehow take it on, the answer is yes, we absolutely will, but we need to have a leader who's willing to do that, because we're a coalition of volunteers. So there just isn't anybody to do that. But Donald, it sounds like you're the world expert on this issue, and you could be the technical expert that would be in the committee to help the membership in that committee move forward.
Thank you. One of the things that's really fascinating is that these people are very, very similar to our own Pueblo people here in New Mexico. They're matrilineal. They respect the land in a way that no one else can understand. They are really focused upon their local communities. And so, yeah, thank you for your comments.
Yes, I look forward to growing together in relationship and to engaging in that work together. Do you remember who the next hand is, Katerina?
Yeah, I think I saw Charlie with his hand raised.
Yeah, that's one that shows.
Yeah, one moment. Let me put my hand down. Okay. So I realize that what I'm going to talk about right now, isn't as prevalent, because we're talking about, I'm talking to a coalition that's all about action. But I'm not sure how much I missed because I had to step away for a second. But I came in when land acknowledgement was being talked about, and recently got to give a land acknowledgement for the first time last month. And as I was asking around about it, because land acknowledgement isn't something that I'm familiar with, it's not done among my people because I grew up with my people. We're not going to acknowledge ourselves in that way. But as I was asking around to different people from the Miwok tribe and Choi-Numni tribe and my own tribe, one thing that was said was that the people around here who do know about land acknowledgements don't really care for it. Not a lot of them don't, because well, there's that idea, okay, you acknowledge us, so now what? What are you going to do? Are you just going to acknowledge that? Are you going to help us? Are you going to do something? So I guess I say that just because that's something I've been thinking about as I think about land acknowledgements, and this whole idea that it's not enough just to acknowledge, and also to acknowledge the reality that not every Indigenous person cares for a land acknowledgement. They'd rather have something else, something more tangible done than being acknowledged.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Charlie. You are singing my song. In fact, when our committee, our Culture Change Committee, created our land acknowledgement resource, there's a certificate in there. It's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, and it says, I am awarded a certificate for learning about land acknowledgement and plan to do nothing about it. Yeah, I think, land acknowledgement is only meaningful when it leads to meaningful relationship and accompaniment and true solidarity. So solidarity, I will just say for myself and define, it is not a symbolic act. It is standing shoulder to shoulder with the person that's facing structural violence and receiving what they receive, and struggling together for survival as humans and as beings who are alive in this earth. And so, the little known story, last year, I served as the chair of the Washington State Redistricting Commission. So I don't know if you're familiar with redistricting, but, every 10 years there's a census and then each state redistricts. Anyway, I was the chair of our commission. And there was a desire to do a land acknowledgement. And I said, no, thank you. I'm not going to be interested in our state doing a land acknowledgement when we know very well that the state has no desire to make a commitment to the Indigenous people of this land. And so I'm with you there, Charlie. What we want to do, and I mean, you all, as you get to know me, will get tired of hearing me say this, is move away from some symbolic gestures toward meaningful, sustained, lifelong relationship where we are struggling together for our own survival, because as Indigenous peoples are threatened and their lands are threatened, all people are threatened and all lands are threatened. As the waters of Indigenous people are threatened, all water is threatened. It just so happens that Native American peoples are the people who are standing up and resisting the pollution and degradation of natural resources. And so, you know, I agree with you. And for some communities, Charlie, land acknowledgement is the first step. That's the step they're willing to take in the beginning. Then over time, they're able to make additional steps. So a big part of what we do in the coalition is educate our constituency. And that is not all we do, because we acknowledge that education is only useful to the extent that it is a tool for organizing. And what is it that we're organizing? We are organizing our constituents and our members and our communities and our churches and our congregations to resist the doctrine of discovery and to dismantle it, not symbolically, but in fact, right? To challenge the laws and policies, to follow the leadership of Indigenous people that are in this struggle in their own environment. That's what we're here to do. And so there is, you know, in our own coalition, this conversation is constant and ongoing. And we recognize too that in social movements, they require diversity. They require different perspectives, different activities, different people doing different things. We're not all doing the same thing in the same way. We try and create the space for people and the resources for people to do what they need to do. They can't not do with support. And then I guess the last thing I'll say about that is that we come together by conviction. We come together and we join the coalition because we're convicted to do that. We stay together because of relationship, right? And love, friendship and love. That's what we provide to each other as we work together side by side. I'm in it for the rest of my life. For every day of the rest of my life, I am in this struggle with you, with each and every one of you, as we struggle for life. And at first, you may come to this work and say, I'm advocating for my neighbor. And in time, you will learn you are advocating for yourself, for your own survival, for your own full humanity, for fullness of life. But we don't have to live in the structures the way they are now. We have a choice and we can choose to seek fullness of life. And that is what we're doing here together. It's like a long-winded response, Charlie. Thanks for listening.
It was a good response.
Do you have more to say about that, Katerina?
I'll just add that I think it may have been one of our Indigenous advisors or Erica Littlewolf who said, Indigenous advisors to the resources that we created, which I linked in the chat here, the Land Acknowledgement Guide, and we also have a Stories of Repair resource. And they told us, at first we were like, let's just create one big resource for next steps for church communities. And they were like, don't put land acknowledgements in the reparative justice resource, because they're not reparative justice. They are just an opening. They are just an opening to further learning. And one of the advisors, I think, said, we hope that land acknowledgements can be like a drip, drip, drip of unsettling, of discomfort over time that forms people. Every time you hear it, I'm on Indigenous lands. I'm on Indigenous lands. Who are the peoples who live here? And as that becomes more and more regular, it's not to grow in comfort, which I think some communities are using it for, a checkbox. Oh, we made it, we're progressive. But the purpose is to actually grow in discomfort and towards doing something and towards unsettling people. The reminder that, oh, this land is not ours, or there are people still present here, that doesn't just put them in the past. So that, I think that was the initial hope, although acknowledging that, like you said, Charlie, our Indigenous advisors were among other Indigenous peoples who were frustrated with the state of land acknowledgements as they've gotten more popularized and are just sort of a routine check the box kind of thing. So So how do we keep them creative? Recently I heard a church that put theirs to song, and they're singing now, and in a really cool way, and incorporating words of commitment into their land acknowledgement. What are other ways that we can keep it fresh? Other churches invite someone to rewrite it every Sunday, depending on who's leading worship. So it's like, it's something that stirs us, that moves us towards action versus a check the box action of, oh, now we did our duty. That would be my comment, I suppose, but hear that. Yeah. Charlie, yeah, back over to you.
This goes way back to the beginning. Sarah, I liked that you pointed out that like there's so much diversity within Indigenous peoples and tribes. One thing I was talking about with Katerina the other day, maybe it was yesterday, I don't even remember when, it was this week. I was reading the Dismantling the Doctrine and Discovery study guide and stuff, and as I, like a lot of this Doctrine and Discovery, or Dismantling the Doctrine and Discovery, and all these movements and contextualization, they seem to have stopped at the other side of the Sierra Nevada and didn't really make it over to Central California. And so a lot of this is new to me. And as I'm trying to introduce it to my people in the church that I'm leading, it's all brand spanking new. But one of the things that I notice is how it's been popularized to refer to the entire continent as Turtle Island, and understanding that that's connected to a creation story where Turtle is the one who brings up the land, or in some stories carries the land on his or her back. Well, in the Western Mono / Yokut stories, it's usually duck or another aquatic bird who swam down and brought up the dirt, and then creator, who's oftentimes falcon or eagle, takes the dirt from duck's fingernails. So we don't refer to this land as Turtle Island. In fact, that was new to me until a couple of years ago when I had to start doing my own research when I joined a program at Fresno Pacific Biblical Seminary, and I was like, oh, I'm having to learn all this stuff on my own because it's not actually part of the program. So here I go. But it's so just, I like that you acknowledge that, because everybody I've read or talked to aren't from these parts. So this continent is always referred to as Turtle Island, and it has no relevance in some ways other than similarities in like maybe the role that turtle played, that duck plays in our stories, has no relevance to our people. So we're like, what are you talking about? And why are you calling it Turtle Island? And that's not what we call it. In fact, the people I talked to said we just called it Tabop, which just means land or earth. It doesn't really have a name per se. But so I'm sorry, that's really long-winded too. But I like that you pointed out that not every tribe is the same, because I'm stuck in the world that I'm in, trying to pursue dismantling or contextualization, where most of the ideas and thoughts and people come from the other side of the mountain and have already adopted some culture that's not here and isn't as relevant to my people's stories and culture. And so it's yeah, so when people usually come here with ideas, it's from the mindset of Turtle Island, or say not realizing that not everybody here is Yokut, and that, like Katerina said, Yokut just means people. That's not really a tribe. Within Yokut and Mono, there's so many different practices and stories and beliefs that all get circulated and changed. So I'm sorry, that again long-winded, but I just appreciated that, because like growing up in my school, I was taught about Plains Indians. I wasn't taught about my own people who inhabited the lands that this school was on. And I wasn't.
Yeah, that's an experience that I share, being from the Southwest United States, where we don't have a duck or a turtle actually. So yeah, I appreciate what you're saying, and thank you for sharing that. And another thing I will just plug too is to say that in the North American context, the way we talk about Native American issues is not universal to the global context. And so even the way we think about indigeneity, even using the word indigeneity, it's different in many different countries, but the issues are the same. And so together we are joining together, and at times bumping into each other and learning together and growing together in this struggle for our humanity and for our lives and for all of creation, following the spirit of life. So I thank you for those comments. And I think we have just about 2 more minutes. So Katerina, do you have closing words? My closing words will be just words of gratitude and thanks for spending this time with us, this special time together, for setting it aside and for listening and being present. And also, I look forward to growing in relationship with you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, likewise, Sarah, and invite folks to reach out to me. I put my email in the chat, and also to Sarah for further engagement, joining committees, starting a committee like might have happened today, and getting more involved in the coalition. We'll be seeing some of you at our annual gathering. And if you would like to join our annual gathering as an observer, if this is your first time joining, we invite you to join as an observer, and I can share the link in a follow-up email with everyone. And Charlie, on that last note of what you're sharing, what I'm hearing too is, how do we make space for diversity as we seek unity together in dismantling the doctrine of discovery and seek to work together? So with that in mind, many of us come from different cultural, spiritual backgrounds, racial, ethnic backgrounds as well, different positions of power. And yet we're seeking this together, like Sarah said, in the spirit of life. We seek to imagine a world that could be. And so invite your imagination and your spirit into this work. So thank you, everyone. And we'll be in touch by email or by Zoom. If you want to schedule a one-on-one call, feel free to reach out. Thanks all for joining. If you want to put any final comments or words in the chat, feel free. And if not, good evening and thank you. Enjoy your night.
Thank you very much.